what happens in the period, and I'm going to scan here about 100 years, but there's some interesting things to observe about this period, because this is the period of the ignore, and the problem here is there's not a lot of evidence for it, so it's my construct in a way. I have to construct a case, an argument, historically, for the ignore, based on very thin evidence, because you don't find very much in the official statutes of New Zealand over this time period from about 1880 through to 1980. That's quite recent times, really, isn't it? But you look at this, here's a bit of evidence. That's the Treaty House in 1902. Overgrown, unkempt, not looked after. 1932 was the first time they started to celebrate Waitangi Day, and that's nearly 100 years after the treaty was signed. I'm saying it's evidence for me that the treaty is a non-issue, it's being ignored by society, it's not really anything that people take much notice of, and that's compounded by the fact that at that time, most Māori lived in the country, and most Europeans lived in cities. And in fact, New Zealand urbanises after World War I if you're European, and after World War II if you're Māori. So right in that pivotal period, this period here, 1940, this is the great New Zealand Centennial Exhibition in 1940 in Wellington. It's actually right on Rongotai Airport. So the airport, before they had the airport built, was where the Centennial Exhibition occurred. And in it, you can see there's Zealandia, a very good 100 years after the treaty, and they're still not really acknowledging. There's a little bit of a whare down here, but by and large, it's a very European country as far as the centenary of our supposed founding document was in 1840 was concerned. So I put that in there just to demonstrate that point. Now, up until the 1980s, New Zealand was largely, so right the time through my childhood, 50s, 60s, 70s, it's largely monocultural, and I think I said to you before, 75 when I started teaching social studies, I didn't teach New Zealand history, because to me New Zealand didn't have a history. I've overcome that, but social studies, we never ever dealt with anything to do with the treaty. But these days, Jaleesa, I've just observed Jaleesa teach a lesson on the treaty and the consequences of it, because that's happened since that time period. Now, for lots of New Zealanders and lots of migrants to New Zealand, that's a really interesting conundrum. It's actually quite tricky to cope with, because if you've been overseas and you've come to this session today because you want to know something about now you've committed to New Zealand as a country, you need to understand where the country's been to and is going to in the context of this one here, and I think that's quite interesting. So, and you'll see it in my own little personal testimony that I've given you a link to, and I sent you out the little PowerPoint in there. If you read that, it's quite extensive, but it's my own personal story, and you'll see lots of things about, for example, Avondale College, which I love because it's the one of the few schools in the country that's got a Māori motto. The rest of them got Latin mottos, and it was born in 1945. That's very, very unusual. Avondale College, European name, but Koia Ngā Taikaka, a Māori motto. And all the schools that were built in the post-war baby boom period had Latin mottos. The 50s and the 60s schools, they all got, quid com and, pro viribus and, fide et virtute and so on. But Avondale College actually had a Māori motto. Okay, now the Māori, and I think the stem of this Māori Renaissance was really where there's a guy who was a was a secretary of Māori Affairs, Kara Puketapu, and he decided to set up the Māori language learning nests. And he said, well, we're going to have to revive our language, and I believe that was the start of that revival of Māori. And of course, it was also starting, because a lot of generation of Māori since World War II had actually lost their language when they came to the cities. And so we had this kind of gap with them as well, where they actually didn't always know their language. And that was really important. But really it was the action of the Labour government in 1975 that started to look at Waitangi Tribunal findings. And when they actually extended it backwards, a lot of people that I knew that were historians at Auckland University, they actually rubbed their hands together and said, oh, this is great, it's going to be such wonderful fuel for historians to start to understand our own country's history for the first time. 1975, as I said, virtually 100 years